Good morning, vinyl community, crime community. I'm here to read another chapter of Poisoner in Chief. Still on the divine mushroom. This is part two. On an autumn evening in Rome 2,000 years ago, Emperor Claudius ate a large meal that included a plate of his favorite mushrooms. Several hours later, he fell violently ill. He trembled, vomited, and gasped for breath and died before morning. 20th century scientists confirmed what some Romans suspected. Claudius's wife, Agrippina, who wanted to place her son in power, had mixed poisonous mushrooms with the one her husbands liked to eat. Wasn't that nice of her? The story of her success tantalized the first crop of CIA agents. Let's go into technology of assassination, one urged in a memo. Figure out most effective ways to kill, like Empress Agrippina. Certain mushrooms have long been known to be poisonous, so it was reasonable to imagine that their chemical extracts could be used to kill. Once Gottlieb launched his mind control project through mushrooms became even more tantalizing. Ancient tradition held some variations that can produce hallucinations and distortions of perception. Spanish friars who came to Mexico in the 20th century reported that natives used mushrooms in religious rituals. These reports fascinated CIA officers who were looking for paths into human psyche. At the end of 1952, Morris Allen learned of a Mexican plant whose seeds, called payule, had a hypnotic effect. He dispatched a CIA officer to collect samples of payule and other seed, plant, herb, or fungus that had high narcotic and toxic value. The officer, who passed himself off as a researcher looking for organic anesthetics, spent several weeks in Mexico. He returned with bags full of spices and samples, and with someone else. Several people he met had told him tales of a magic mushroom. Native shamans and priestesses said they used it as a pathway to the divine. Does that sound like Charlie Manson? They called it Godflesh. Very early accounts of the ceremonies of some tribes of Mexico Indians show that mushrooms were used to produce hallucinations and to create intoxication. Allen wrote after hearing his officer's report, in addition, this literature shows that witch doctors or divinators use some type of mushrooms to produce confessions or to locate stolen objects or to predict the future. It is essential that the peculiar qualities of this mushroom be explored. Gottlieb had the Mexican plant samples analyzed when he was told that several did indeed contain possibly psychoactive substances. He led them to look for a chemical he could send to Mexico to find organic toxins and, if possible, the magic mushrooms. He approached the Detroit-based pharmaceutical firm Park Davis and asked if he could recommend a suitable candidate. His offer was tempting, as chemist would remain at Park Davis and work for the CIA, which would pay his salary. His company suggested a serious-minded young researcher named James Monroe, who was a graduate student, had worked at the Manhattan Project. Moore was offered the job and accepted. If I had thought I was participating in a scheme run by a small band of mad individuals, Moore said years later, I would have demurred. Moore soon realized that he was not the only non-Mexican searching for God's flesh. A remarkable married couple, Gordon and Valentina Wasson, had preceded him. Gordon Wasson was a successful New York banker who had married a Russian-born pediatrician who was obsessed with mushrooms. On their honeymoon, Valentina shocked him by racing towards a pasture of mushrooms, bending before them and posing in adoration and insisting that they were things of grace, infinitely inviting to the perceptive mind. She harvested a basket of them and, in her new husband's horror, ate them at dinner. He told her that he feared being a widower by morning, but she survived without ill effect. that converted him. Together they set out on a lifelong journey into the mushroom world. In the early 1950s, the Watsons made several trips to southern Mexico in search of the magic mushroom. Their first two trips were fruitless. Gordon Watson made a third trip, this time accompanied by a photographer, and in Oaxacan village they found a young Indian who led them to the home of a Maztec woman named Maria Sabina. She was known as the guardian of ancient wisdom, who used mushrooms to commune with the infinite. On the night of June 29th, 1955, sitting before a rustic altar, she conducted her ritual. She distributed mushrooms to about 20 Indians, and the first time in recorded history to outsiders. I am a woman who shepherds the immense, Marina Sabina chanted as her guests slipped into a different form of consciousness. Everything has its origin, and I come going from place to place from the origin. For the next several hours, the chants continued. Watson and his photographer careened into a new world. They were never more wide awake, and the visions came whether our eyes were closed or open. He wrote afterward, the effect of the mushrooms is to bring about a fission of the spirit, a split in the person, a kind of schizophrenia, with a rational side continuing to reason to observe the sensations that the other side is enjoying. The mind is attached by an elastic cord to the vagrant senses. Watson could have no idea that news of his discovery would electrify mind control experiments in Washington, whose ambitions were vastly different from his own. James Moorhead reports of Watson's trips, wrote him a letter. He gave no hint that he was working for the CIA. Instead, he told a partial truth. He was interested in researching the chemical properties of the magic mushroom. He correctly guessed that Watson would be returning to the Mexican town where he had found it. Attila de Jimenez was asked to accompany him. To strengthen his case, he mentioned that he knew of the foundation that would help pay for the expedition. A deal was struck. The CIA sent Watson $2,000, disguised as a grant, from the Gessler Fund of Medical Research. In exchange, Watson agreed to take more with him to Mexico. It was MK Ultra, Subproject 58, aimed at unraveling the secrets of mushrooms. Watson, Moore, and two French mycologists made their way to Attila de Jimenez and found Maria Sabina. She agreed to repeat the ceremony. Watson again found it transcendent. The mushrooms, he wrote afterward, gave him a feeling of ecstasy and raised him to a height where you have not been in everyday life, not ever. Moore had the opposite reaction. He did not like the dirt floor, was cold and hungry, had diarrhea, and itched all over. The ceremony, he wrote in his report, was all this chanting in the dialect. I did feel the hallucinogenic effect, although disorientation would be a better word to describe my reaction. He had no empathy for what was going on, Lawson later said. He was like a landlubber at sea. He got sick to his stomach and hated it all. One relationship decorated during the course of the trip. Despite Moore's discomfort, Gottlieb and his MK Ultra comrades conducted his trip a great success because he returned with the samples of psychoactive mushrooms they had ordered. CIA officers had already visited a mushroom-producing region of Pennsylvania and told a couple of growers that they might be asking for help producing a rare fungus. Gottlieb cautioned, however, that research into the psychoactive properties of mushrooms must remain an agency secret. Inevitably, word of Watson's adventure spread beyond his own circle and the circle of MK Ultra scientists. Life magazine was about to write about it. The result was a 17-page spread, lavishly illustrated, in which Watson described his experiences. He wrote that his spirit had flown forth and was suspended in midair. He reported that thought crossed his mind that could divide mushrooms be the secret that lay behind the ancient mysteries. The article propelled a small horde of curious Americans toward Attila de Jimenez. Marina Sabina came to wish she had never shared her people's secrets. Watson regretted that he had pressed her to do so. Indigenous people in Mesoamerica had 4 centuries used the magic mushroom to bring them closer to invisible spirits. Watson saw as an aid to self-discovery, a way to open what the poem William Blake called the doors of perception. Gottlieb's interest was entirely different. His lifelong research for tranquility had led him to believe that the universe embraces forces beyond known science. At the CIA, he devoted himself to discovering and harnessing these forces, not as a way to ease pain or to expand consciousness, but to serve the interests of one country's pursuing one set of political goals at one historical moment. The image of CIA men trapezing through Mexican villages in search of a fungus that would help them defeat communism seems outlandish to retrospect. Gottlieb, however, saw the magic mushroom the same way he saw LSD and every other substance he was investigating. All were potential weapons of covert war. We will end here and leave part 3 for tomorrow, where they will go into more aspects of the magic mushroom. If you see any truth or like any of my stream, please like and share and subscribe. Thank you.